really great to be here. I, of course, have a great connection with Taiwan, as people have mentioned, and so I'm really, really, really delighted to have this opportunity to share with you our common future. And if I could have my slides, that would be great. So, you can see I have technology all over here. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But that is my symbol for optimism. And I got a lot of my optimism from Taiwan. From my first visit in Taiwan 40 years ago, it was a very different place than it is today. And I could see, even then, it began to transform itself to become one of the wealthiest places on earth. And that vision of it changing almost daily gave me optimism and the belief that almost anything was possible. And I want to extend that optimism back to you, to indicate that we are actually, despite some of the recent news, economically, we're actually on a journey towards progress, that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And I want to take some time to talk about specifically what some of those things look like. And I have to say, I did not consult with Johnny Shear about his vision, but we actually agree on a lot of the things. You'll see some echoes of the same vision, because I think that's where we're going to. So, one of the things I want to start with is the fact that Wired Magazine began before the web. And we were involved in talking about the web and what we expected the web to be. And we were wrong. Everybody was wrong about the web. We all expected it to be something like television, but only better. You could get 500 channels, and it would be made by these producers who would give you wherever you wanted. Of course, the main event of the web has been the social aspect, the fact that the users have been creating all the good stuff. It hasn't been AOL, Time Warner, it's been the users who have made it. We missed that. Wired missed that. That was not what anybody was expecting. And so, I think right now we're looking at the web, the digital world, and we're thinking it's going to be like that, but better. And I think we're going to be wrong. It's not better web, just like the web is not better TV. We're making something that's actually going to look very different. We have lots of different names that we're trying out about what to call that. But I want to indicate that I think we're going to be very surprised, and it's not just going to be like the web and web pages and more of the same. I'd like to talk about the fact that we can measure the extent of this entire thing that has happened in the number of days. It gives us a sense that we're actually still at the very beginning. The entire web browser, the days of the first web browsers like Netscape till now, we're about 7,000 days. And so if you think about all the things that have happened that we now have in 7,000 days, and I'd like to say if you go back to 1990 or even earlier, but even 1990, and if I was to come back and report to people back in 1990 and tell them what we have now, we have this search thing, those are the answers. We have maps to the entire world in the streets. We have every sports score. We have stock quotes flowing constantly from around the world. We have the weather of any place in the world that you want. We have an encyclopedia that's better than Encyclopedia Britannica. We have all this stuff. It goes on and on. I could spend an hour telling you about the amazing things that we have. And most of it's free. Somebody back then would tell you there is no way that's possible. There's no economic model that could make that thing work. And so we have to get better at believing things that seem to be impossible. So I'm going to tell you maybe some things that seem unlikely or impossible, and keep that in mind, that oftentimes things that do happen seem impossible at the time. So I have 4 general trends, reflecting the minister's 4 trends. I have 4 trends I want to talk about. And the first trend is screening. We are being surrounded by screens. Screens everywhere. Screens that we stroke, and they're very close to our bodies, and screens that, how does this work? Okay. Screens that are being used by kids, that are very intimate from the babyhood days. And in addition to the screens, we have voice, Siri, and others. We're increasing the ways that we interact with these screens. We actually will talk to them. We'll talk to the screens. And each screen has an eyeball in it, has a camera in it, that's looking at us as we watch the screen. So as we're watching the screen is looking back at us. And that screen is watching us watch the screen, meaning that there's a kind of interactivity, a relationship with our screens. So it's not that they're everywhere, and by everywhere I mean literally, in the goodness of time, every surface, every flat surface, will have a display on it. Even if that display is just showing wallpaper, it can be changed. And so it's not glass, it's kind of a plastic, or it's printed. It's as cheap as paint. And those screens will be on every flat surface, every curved surface. That is going to be the world of ubiquitous screens that we're going into. And this will happen slowly, but we can already see the screens happening everywhere. And these screens, again, have cameras in them that are watching us as we watch them, so that you have things like eye tracking, which can be done now, showing you where you're paying attention to, what you're paying attention to, how long you're paying attention to it. The work at MIT Media Lab is showing an ability to actually discern our emotion, whether what we're looking at, are we perplexed by it, confused, are we distracted, are we hurt by it, or are we enjoying it? And so there's a sense in which we are engaged in these screens, and then it's also detecting our mood so that it can then adapt to what we're seeing, what we're watching. What's being shown is adapting to our own emotions, just as if we were in a conversation, and if I noticed that you were not paying attention, I might change the subject, or I might focus on something else that we talked about before. So in the same way, these screens are going to respond, and there's kind of an adaptive sense in which the movie, or the video, or the text, or the game is responding to us watching it. So these screens are not passive. They're actually active screens. And they're responding to, of course, our gestures. And you saw some of that in the video which was just shown, in the sense that we're using our whole bodies. It's just not our fingertips talking. It's our gestures. We dance. We interact with these with our arms. And we have some examples, of course, in the movies of Minority Report and Iron Man, where they're engaged in kind of these very complex data sets, and they're using their bodies, they're conducting, they're swinging arms. It's a whole body interaction with these screens. Even though the screens are kind of 3D screens, nevertheless, they're displayed. So, and of course, recently, I haven't updated this since the news, but I've been talking about it for a while, we see the coming screens into our spectacles. Google announced the Google glasses. These are prototypes, but they actually have one now. There's a picture of Sergey Brin wearing one of these. And again, they're overlaying this digital world on top of the world that we see. And I think that's very important, because the crucial idea is that these are screens that we wear. So this is going to become very big, very fast. People are often saying, what's after the smartphone? This is after the smartphone. This is after the tablet. These spectacles, understanding, making how we can actually use them, navigate them, manipulate them, incorporate them into our daily lives. And so even screens that we wear. But what we're going to see with these is this overlay of the virtual world, the information world, put on top of and embedded into the physical world. And this overlay of augmented worlds, where the two worlds are converging, and we see the data laid into so that we have kind of an X-ray view, a superpower of actually being able to see to the information of things. It's not a separate world. This is an important point. The virtual digital world is not separate. The two converge into a single world, and they will partly do that with these screens that we wear. So, at the same time, screens are becoming ubiquitous and devices are shrinking away from our view. The success of innovation and invention and a device is often the ability for it to disappear from our lives. In a certain sense, the ideal situation is that we carry no devices at all, and that the screens around us are watching us and are interacting us with our natural movements and our natural gestures, and that from that, without any devices, they're able to recognize us and to interact with us. So the screens are proliferating and becoming ubiquitous, and the devices ideally actually disappear just as the motors the motors of the Industrial Revolution were huge and big, and they disappeared, even though there's hundreds of motors in this room that we're not even aware of, including one right here. That was because motors have succeeded. And in the same way, some of these devices will succeed by disappearing from our possessions. So, screens, that's the first theme of this world. Screens everywhere, ubiquitous screens as the center, screens as the center of our culture. So we were, at least in the West, people of the book. The book was central. We had a book of laws, we had the Constitution, we had the Bible, we had everything written down, and the center of our culture and education was the book. Now we've become people of the screen, and the screen is the center of culture, and screens have a different culture. They have a different dynamic. They behave differently, and they generate a different kind of culture. The idea of truth in the book era was the author, it was the authority. Author and authority have the same common root in English. And in truth, in the screen world, is not based on authors, it's based on relations, connections, associations. That's good and bad, but that's where we're going to. So the screen is the center of this era that we're headed into. And the second idea was flowing. So this is the chart of the amount of information on the planet, and information is being increased at basically 66.5% a year, which is Moore's law. It's doubling every 18 months. It's the fastest expanding entity on this planet. There's no manufactured thing that we're making as fast over sustained decades. There's no biological thing growing that fast. Information, we're an information planet at this point. And so it's just, that is the currency, that is the fuel of the new economy, and that's what's rapidly expanding. And part of the wealth will be actually being able to harness that growth, to manage it, to decipher it, and filter it, and analyze it. Metadata, so here's the reason why that's going up so fast, is that every time we make some new information, we make information about the information, which is growing even faster. So whenever you sell something or generate a sales, that's a piece of information, and then the information about that sales grows even, there's 3 or 4 other things to say about that piece of information. So this information is growing at such a rate that it's actually exploding. And someone did a calculation showing that the rate of this digital universe is expanding as, it's expanding at the rate of an explosion. It's like a piece of TNT exploding. That's how fast this information is expanding on this planet. So there's an example, just a little chart of exabytes. We didn't have exabytes a couple of years ago. Now we have 276 exabytes. There's a lot of zeros at the end of that. It's a lot of information, and there's no end in sight of how much information we can actually, potentially, even generate. So that information is this other world. That information is this other economy. And we're putting little tiny chips of intelligence into everything we make, into the chairs. Into every chair will have a little chip in it. Your shoes with Nikes doing it. Your clothes. The doorknobs in hotels have computers in them. Everything will have a little tiny chip in it, a little tiny bit of intelligence. And even more so, we can think of these things like this car. Most of the cost of that car is not in the material, it's not in the carbon or the aluminum or even the rubber. It's in the electronics and the computation and the design, all the intangibles. So this shoe, Nike shoe, is really kind of a chip that has wheels on it, and that's a chip with wheels on it. You have to understand that these things are primarily informational devices. That's the value is not in the materials, the value is in the information and the intangibles, and that we're connecting all these things together into this Internet of Things. So it's not just the Internet of people, it's the Internet of Things, all these stuff connected to each other. Most of the communication bandwidth in the world today is already machines talking to other machines. Humans talking to other humans is a smaller and smaller part of the total amount of this economy. Most of it is machines, things talking to other things. And so we have this database of things. You can think of it as a worldwide database, semantic web, these are terms, this is the ubiquitous cloud. It's this thing, the larger one thing of all the other things that have little bits of intelligence and chips in them, connected together to make this very large brain. And I did a calculation showing that the number of transistors and the number of computers connected in this larger brain, larger web worldwide is about the same number of neurons in a human brain. The number of web pages in the world is about the same number of synapses in the human brain. So the thing we made of this world is almost the same complexity as our own brains. The shift that we're having right now is that this information is the amount of information and the flows of information has shifted to the third regime of computing, personal computing. The first regime was files and folders and desktops. It was taking the metaphor of the office. And that was the PC generation. And so it was kind of just like, we just took the desktop, the office metaphor, and that's what we had. We had files and folders and desktops. The second generation was the web. We had pages and links. That was the web. But we've now moved into the third regime, the third organizing principle, and that is one that's based on streams and tags and cloud. So rather than have pages, we have streams. We have Facebook updates, we have Twitter streams, we've got Netflix streams, we've got Google Plus streams, we've got streams and streams of everything. It all flows in real time, and it's a stream of data. And that shifts so we've gone, this third iteration, we're moving from pages to streams, from the PC as the center, to the cloud as the center, from the today as being the currency to now to real time. The shift from me, the personal computer, to the we of the social web, and the shift as the unit as items of things to data. That's part of this shift to the new paradigm. And everything flows into that. Again, it's not just data that we're generating as individuals, but that my shoe is generating, my shirt is generating, my doorknob is generating, my house is generating, my room is generating. All this stuff is flowing into this cloud. It's everywhere. And the data is always moving. We talk about storage, but I don't think storage is the right word. I think we want to talk about movage because it's constantly moving. If you put something on a CD-ROM, you're not going to be able to read a CD-ROM in a couple of years. You've got to move it to some other form or factor, and if you want to really save it, you have to keep moving things. So things are moving around, and they're constantly moving, so we have this movage. Things are always moving, they're always on, right? If those things are always on, and so, and it's in real time. If it's not in real time, it doesn't count. So there is a sense of the streams and flows, not static web pages, but this kind of ocean of streams and flows going through of data. Okay, so that's the new media, that's the new platform. Flows of data. So here's the third trend that we're seeing, and that is sharing, that has been mentioned before, this idea of social. And these live streams that people make, they generate when they intersect with one another, there is a sharing, there is intersection. And live blogging is something that I've been following and encouraging people to think about. It has something to do with quantifying, and basically, if you have a stream of everything you do, every keystroke, every picture you upload, that's life blogging. So people are more and more funneling their entire life through this stream, where they add everything to the stream, and their lives become this chronological stream. That's called life blogging. If you include everything, then you're a life blogger. But you can also share all this stuff. So here's Gordon Bell at Microsoft. He had a little camera he was wearing, and he took a picture every 5 seconds, so he had complete documentation of everybody he met, everything he saw. He recorded all his keystrokes, he recorded all his conversations. He's sort of obsessive, crank, extremist, but that's the new normal. Okay? That's where we're all going to be going. We're all going to be recording everything because it costs very little, and there will be many, many benefits to it. So there's body logging, people who are tracking everything in their bodies, and they're doing things like the Fitbit, which I'm wearing right here, okay, which records my steps, my activities, after you even record the sleeping patterns. And these are going to be the basis of the new health technology. There's ones that you wear that record oxygen, glucose, all kinds of bodily factors, and eventually we'll be recording everything about us, location, mood, health, and that self-quantification is the foundation of the health, will be the foundation of the health industry. And by the way, this is also, I think, a tremendous opportunity for Taiwan, because this is engineering, which you're really great at. This is healthcare, which you're really great at. This is quality of life, which you're really great at. This is a combination of technology and lifestyle. And I think the quantified self is this movement of trying to quantify automatically our entire lives into a data stream. So I have this data stream, and I can look back at it. I can find out what's normal for me, for my own body. When medicine and science talk about normal and humans, they actually don't know. The normal is average, and there's nobody who is average medically. And so we actually don't know what your normal is. So we can find out what your normal is by self-quantifying and wearing this stuff and having it in our clothes, in our shoes, in our seats, everywhere. So these are some examples of some of the current technology of self-quantification. Feeding into this data stream. So any data that can be shared will be shared. And this is the other amazing discovery about human nature, is that there's a long list of things that people said nobody would share. You're not going to share financial information. You're not going to share health information. Wrong, 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 wrong. We'll share anything under the right circumstances, right benefits. Anything that can be shared will be shared somewhere under the right conditions, with the right permissions. And I think that brings up a whole bunch of questions which we don't know. Nobody knows the answers to these. These are some of the fundamental paradoxes, mysteries of the current world is who owns these kinds of, who owns the data, what's ownership like in this world of shared information? Is it the person who claims that they own it? Is it both sides own it? Who owns it? We don't know. These are all unanswered questions, only to indicate that this is a huge frontier. But I would have to say one thing about privacy, because it always comes up in questions, and that is that privacy is a matter of disclosure and benefits. The benefits of personalization. In order to have something to be personalized, which is another one of these trends, you have to reveal yourself. If you want something to be ultimately 100% personalized to you, you have to reveal yourself to that company or the friend or the government, or whatever it is that you want. If you want to be treated as an individual, you can reveal yourself as an individual to them. So it's kind of sliding. If you don't want to reveal yourself, you can be hidden, you can be unknown, but you also will be treated generically, not as an individual. So there's a slider that goes back and forth, where if you want maximum transparency, you can get maximum personalization. If you don't want that, if you want to be private and generic, that's fine too. But the whole thing is a slider. And I think what we're finding out, the huge surprise to everybody was that generally people push that slider to personalization and transparency. We're far more interested in moving it to the transparent side and sharing it. That's where it goes. Nobody really kind of expected that. So I like to say vanity trumps privacy. Say almost every time. We didn't think that's what human nature is, but that's what we're finding out. So, you do want to have another axis, which is being able to control what happens to the information. And that is something that we need to work on, because we don't, what happens to it, who else gets to know about it, and so forth. So there's many dimensions to this idea of this ubiquitous world. We're sharing all this information. I think the word privacy is not a very good word, because it means lots of different things, and we need to unbundle and unravel some of those things. But these are big issues when we're talking about this world of ubiquitous computation, ubiquitous digital life. What happens to these issues? And I think there are ways to think about them that we haven't been using. I would say, though, that we're just at the beginning of the sharing meter. On the meter of sharing from 1 to 100, I think we're still down to single digits in terms of the amount that we're sharing and the potential that we have to share more. We've just begun this process. People get upset about Facebook, the kids sharing on Facebook. They haven't seen anything yet in terms of the amount of stuff that we're going to share. So the last trend is called accessing. And that is this idea that, very briefly, in this future world, the idea of ownership starts to diminish in its attractiveness. It turns out that owning things will be less positive than actually having access to something. You see there's movies and music, and eventually books and games, and the intangible world where there's really very little advantage to owning something, and there's a tremendous preference to having access to that, which you will pay for. So I'm not saying it's free, I'm saying you can pay for access, but you don't have to keep it updated, you don't have to store it, you don't have to back it up, you don't have to get the latest version. You just pay your money to have access to all the music in the world from your device or from your home, or access to every movie that's ever been made, or any book. And that is something that will begin in the digital world, but will actually flow over to the physical world as it becomes easier to ship things around or make things. The benefits of owning things become less relevant. And I think zip cars and other kinds of things, hosting, all these things are indicating that ownership is really not as important in this world. So there is a shift from ownership to access. Ownership to access is the other shift, other trend that we're going to see here. just-in-time buying where you don't actually, because you have access to it, like on your Kindle, there's actually no reason for you ever to buy a book until 5 minutes before you're ready to read it, because you have access to it anywhere in the world, anytime. Why? It's just-in-time purchasing. There's no reason to ever buy anything ahead of the minute that you actually need it. So, access is better than ownership. So, let me just end with the summary of these ideas. Screen. The world's going to screens. It's going to flows of data. It's going to sharing of this stuff. And it's going to access over ownership. And so the last thing I want to say about that is again, that we're at the beginning of this. That just as much as all this stuff has changed in the last 7,000 days, it's going to change even more in the next 7,000 days. It really is. It's not going to look like web pages done better. It's going to look very different. It's this ubiquitous connection of all data, of all our data being collected and moved up. It's not static. It's very kinetic. Even the screens are interactive. It's a cloud that the ideas of ownership are being questioned, and the devices themselves will continue to specialize, even though we'll have the Swiss Army knife of the smartphone. But I think the other message that I want to really emphasize is that you're not late. Nobody's late. You're not late. This is at the very beginning. You're present at the beginning. Right here, there's as much chance as anybody to make this possible. So, thank you for your attention, and I know that we have some questions.